We're speaking to Jonathan Davis, economist and wealth advisor, who says the candidates should stop buying votes with our money, and Nigel Evans MP, who, well, you are backing Boris Johnson, Nigel, but more broadly, you think that they're well within their rights to be making these promises, both of them.
Yeah, I think we're sort of in what I would call a mini general election here. I've got to say, Jeremy, as you know, I've still got the scars of the 2017 general election manifesto still on my back. I was very critical of Theresa May for putting the Grim Reaper on the front cover of our manifesto then, and if only we'd had something like what both Jeremy Hunt and Boris are now pledging, then we would have won that general election instead of being in a minority government. But we are where we are, and clearly both of them are now looking not just to the ballot that is currently taking place within the Conservative Party. And by the way, Jeremy, the ballot papers are being received now.
Okay. Because it seems to have been going on for about 4 years, this election.
Yeah, well, I can say on the Back Boris WhatsApp group, people are saying that they've now voted for Boris. So those are now being received by Conservative Party members. And I suspect what you're seeing now, both from Boris and Jeremy, they know that those ballot papers will have gone out this morning. People will be receiving them today. And therefore, there is an absolute flurry. You're right. They're putting their manifestos on the table, not only simply for the constituency members, but also, I believe, because no MP I've spoken to thinks we're going to go until 2022 for the general election. We all know that at some stage it's going to come sooner rather than later. And I suspect both Jeremy and Boris are looking at the opinion polls today, front page of the Times, where the Labour Party have now moved into fourth place. This is quite incredible, on 18% of the votes.
Okay.
I think both candidates now are probably looking to see how they can win over not just Conservative Party members, but also laying the foundations for that election.
I understand. Jonathan Davis, you're looking at all these numbers being sprayed around. You're not impressed?
Well, indeed, and Nigel Evans there, good guy generally, but he loves spending our money, as do the leadership contenders, the prime ministerial contenders. There's our money, as Tim John said, your man, he said there's only two ways that governments can raise money. It's either by raising taxes or raising borrowing. Clearly, they're not going to raise taxes here, so they're going to raise borrowing.
Can they not just print money?
It's the same thing. It's raising borrowing. Ultimately, who's got to pay the money back? You and me and all of your listeners. We're the ones who will be left carrying the bag when these guys run into the sunset, into their directorial jobs and whatever they do in the world stage. And the thing that people don't realise, and you need to get this into your head, the biggest tax of all is the one that no one ever talks about. Inflation. And the more borrowings that you have in the medium to long term, inflation creeps up, and that's when we really pay for it, long after these guys have left.
And Nigel, as a Conservative, these two are appealing to Conservative members who you would think would not be impressed with, what was Boris Johnson's famous phrase, spaffing everything against the wall? Isn't that what he said?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree a lot with what Jonathan has said, to be honest. The magic money tree, clearly it's been watered over the last 2 years and has now borne some fruit, but clearly it's not a forest. And therefore, we've got to look at exactly where that money...
It's a tree and not a forest.
Exactly.
Right. But seriously, Nigel, aren't your members really... I mean, by definition, they are the most conservative people in the country.
Absolutely.
So I'm assuming that you don't win their hearts over by just promising to splash a lot of cash around.
Absolutely. And if inflation took off, we would certainly not get any support from the elderly.
Right.
We get a lot of support from the elderly. But the one area which I'm really supportive of today is the announcement by Boris about the extra 20,000 police officers. As you know, they've gone down by roughly that number over the last 10 years. And I know that in my own constituency of the Ribble Valley, people complain to me regularly that they don't see police officers, that we need to see more police on the beat. And as you know, crime has risen. And even in rural areas, we've seen the thefts of cars and people's houses being broken into. Conservatives are the party of law and order. And there will be rejoicing, I believe, in households, Conservative households throughout the country saying, thank goodness, at last, he's now talking about putting extra police on the beat. So that's going to be good. And on Jeremy's front, of course, defence. defence. And he has pledged extra money on defence, and there again, we are the party of defence. So you're not going to get many Tories saying, no, we shouldn't be spending that extra money on defence. They'll be backing Jeremy on that.
And Jonathan, to underline Nigel's point, people see police on the beat. They do not see a gross debt of £1,837 billion. You can't see that.
And you've just summed up democracy. You've just summed up politics. For the last 100 years, when the politicians got it into the head that all they have to do is promise more and more and apparently charge less and less, that's how they get elected and re-elected. That's their primary objective. And to
Mrs. Thatcher wouldn't have been elected on that basis, though.
Well, isn't it interesting that in a manifesto or a set of policies of spending restraint, borrowing restraint, prudence, treating the government finances like a household finances, she got re-elected twice. And it was hugely popular. And indeed, I'm glad you brought that up, because the last time the United Kingdom was truly economically prosperous was the 1980s. And since then, all they've done is ramped up spending, ramped up borrowing. You realise we're now at £2,000 billion worth of debt. I am telling you, Nigel says, if we move into inflation, well, I can tell you, given the macroeconomics that I'm looking at, we are heading to inflation, and this is going to boost inflation, and the people are the ones going to be left holding the bag. That's the point that people should get to grips with.
Nigel, I know you are a fan of Mrs. T, but how is it Jonathan is sounding more conservative than you?
He does, rather, doesn't he? And you're quite right. She is my heroine and one of the reasons why I'm in politics. But the reality is, of course, this isn't all going to happen tomorrow. And if it did, then I think Jonathan's warnings and predictions could be right. But a lot of this is going to come as and when we can afford it. As you know, when we pledged to raise the thresholds before people paid income tax to £12,500, that didn't happen on day one. It happened over a period of years. And so a lot of this is going to happen as and when. So it's not the need for inventing more magic money trees out of nowhere. It is got to be prudent, sound economics as well. It's got to run side by side. We're going to save some money from leaving the European Union, and some of that is going to be ploughed into these pledges, I'm sure, by both the candidates. And, of course, employment has increased every month over the last 2 years. Unemployment's come down. And some of these pledges, don't forget, when you're talking about employing extra police and increasing the money in the National Health Service, well, of course, some of that money then will be coming back through to the Treasury in the taxation that people will be paying anyway. So there's a lot to be said on these pledges that are there. And I think you're going to find that they're going to be incredibly popular, Jeremy, not just with Conservatives, but people believe that the NHS has been starved of cash over the years, so they're very supportive of the extra money going in there, and the same with education as well.
Thank you. We note Jonathan's objections. We'll leave it there. Nigel Evans MP, who's backing Boris Johnson, but speaking out for both candidates there about their right to offer to spend money. Jonathan Davis, economist, wealth advisor, who is very, very uneasy about it indeed.